Hello and welcome to WJTS in.form. We are once again honored to have in the studio State Senator Mark Messmer, who visits us weekly as the legislation goes on. And Mark, I guess we're past the halfway point. How many more weeks? When does the sessions end?
Session will end on April 29th.
Okay.
The end of our final passage of bills, what they call the third reading deadline, is April 16th, and then the final 10 days or so is conference committee time, where we take House bills and Senate bills that got amended, in one chamber or the other, and try to, hammer out agreements between the House and Senate versions of a bill. That'll take about 10 days to do that, and then April 29th we wrap up.
Okay, now you did do some preliminary work before your session started, and that you did a survey, and kind of give the timeline of that survey, and then what your results were.
Okay, sent those out at the end of December, right around around Christmas, and had people could either mail in their survey results, or do them online on my Indiana government website. We told them to have the mailed-in results, back by the end of January 31st. So then we took the month of February to compile them all, put them into the computer, tabulate the results, and the online results and the mailed-in results were, pretty close. But it did change the numbers, slightly when we put all over 1,000 of those responses back together. And some of the questions I had, one was on do we need to increase our education funding, and actually 3/4 of the respondents, thought that our education funding, as a whole was about right, but we are going to put about a 3.5–4% increase, in K through 12. So continue and trying to build up what they call the baseline numbers for all students more equally across the state. During this budget cycle, we will complete the transition to where everybody will have the same baseline per student, across the state. So it was planned on being a 7-year transition. We ended up doing it in 5, but really it was important to do. We had, at one point, IPS, Indianapolis and Gary were getting double the amount per student as we were here. And as of last year's budget cycle, we had it down to, instead of a 2-to-1 difference, it was only a 50% more for those schools. Now after this 2-year cycle, everybody's baselines will be the same. So good news for us, because that helps all the urban and suburban school district, or the rural. The urbans were skewed on the other way, but the rural and suburban districts will be helped greatly by our new funding mechanism. So glad with that. Asked about additional road funding. We need more money for roads, and we've just been allocating extra money from the general fund, rather than increasing the excise tax on fuel. And folks want more money spent on roads, but 58% said don't increase my taxes to do it. So it makes a catch-22 that, but we'll look at some other, also for folks who have hybrid vehicles or electric cars, finding some way to get them paying something in, for their share of the use of the roads. Currently, they're not getting picked up if they have propane or if they have electric, anything that's an alternative fuel that's not gasoline or diesel is not paying in. So they'll continue to look at how we're going to address that. It may be part of the budget. It could be a transportation bill yet. Pseudoephedrine sales. Had asked, do you want to make that prescription to help tighten down the accessibility for the methamphetamine dealers? And 67% said they would support making that a prescription instead of over the counter for purchasing pseudoephedrine, the Sudafed and other generics. And we ended up on the Senate side. I don't know if the House actually passed a bill dealing with it, but we passed a bill that if you have any drug felonies in your history, you have to have a prescription to get it. I mean, you're dealing with drug dealers and drug, illegal drug manufacturers. If you have any history of any kind of drug felonies, that those folks have to buy a prescription, trying to still protect the law-abiding citizen from having to, go to the doctor to get a prescription, the increased costs that'll go with that. The bill we passed in the Senate, dealt with drug felons only. And but there is some support out there, going full prescription, but it will be, quite a nuisance for the rest of us if we have to go that route. And especially when we looked at other states that had done that, their actual use of methamphetamine has gone up.
So it really didn't change.
It did.
It was the opposite.
It takes care of one problem. You know, the people that make the one pot batches and the small producers that then end up, you know, contaminating the car or, you know, contaminating the house. It deals with a symptom of methamphetamine use, but it's not been effective at all in dealing with the problem of methamphetamine use. So we'll continue to look at that and make changes. Moving casinos, you know, from their boats on land. My survey had 71% support of that. And the bill we've got coming over from the House Bill 1540, does exactly that. It gives them the ability, you know, if they've got the capital to do it, you know, when their boat needs to be replaced or upgraded, to move it to the footprint of where their casino is licensed now. And there was a few other provisions that would help. So the racinos in Annapolis, as part of that House Bill 1540, they've had electronic, you know, gaming machines, slot machines, electronic poker machines. They're going to allow them to have half of their electronic games be replaced with live dealers, and along with that, you know, that would have a direct impact on the casino over near Cincinnati, you know, Rising Sun and French Lick, and the one in Harrison County. So for those, and those casinos had really pretty low volumes as far as casino revenue as a whole. So we're going to reduce their rate to those, you know, to those low volume casinos, just to be able to deal with the competitive issues from across the state. And then if we give the live dealers to the racinos, a big percentage of their traffic currently comes from Indianapolis. Well, if they can get live dealers at Anderson or Shelbyville, they're going to see a reduction, and so adjusting their tax rates will help balance their projected loss of revenue that they're going to, you know, have. So trying to keep the Indiana casinos, you know, viable, competitive. They are a relatively large chunk of employment and a pretty good chunk of revenue to the state on an annual basis. So 20 years ago, when we started casinos in Indiana, we were the only casino in this part of the only state that had casinos. So no matter what we did, they were going to be successful because there was no competition. But now Illinois has come online, Michigan's come online, and Ohio has come online with casinos, you know, in the past decade, and that competition is really, you know, causing us to need to go back and adjust how we tax them and some of their rules of operation to help them stay competitive. Sunday sales, which that bill ended up dying at the end of the first half in the House. They couldn't get the votes to get anything passed. But surprisingly, still have 57% of the respondents opposed to Sunday sales. That issue for me has continually floated. I've polled it my first year, my third year, my fifth year, now my seventh year, and every year that number stays. It stays right about a 50-50 issue, usually more opposed than support. This was probably the strongest response in opposition to Sunday sales that I've had. But no changing in that this year, and really the folks on the House side that were, you know, looking to move a bill to open up Sunday sales said if we're going to do it, we're also going to address some of the policy dealing with how large retailers and pharmacies, you know, deal with their hard liquor, and you know, getting it to a point where kids under 21 can't get their hands on it. But the large retailers didn't want any change, so they wanted no changes. They just wanted the, you know, extra day of sales, and the two just could not meet. So that bill died, and
yeah, it's done.
It's done. Okay. So one bill we don't have to deal with in public
right.
policy the second half. And then the last issue that really has had a lot of discussion locally, with annexation of cities, you know, out into you know, outlying areas, grabbing areas that are currently unannexed, the issue of forced annexation, and then dealing with the, you know, taking of electric utilities, you know, in those areas. I had 92% of the respondents say the practice of cities being able to take areas and annex them without majority approval of those property owners needs to stop. 92% is a pretty strong number. So, you know, when that issue came up, I was contacted by the mayors of our community and the outlying communities, asking me not to support Senate Bill 330, and my response back was, when 92% of my constituents say something's needs to change, I'm back in the 92% rather than you 4. Mm-hmm. Only people I had saying don't do it were the mayors of the communities in the area, but pretty strong support from the people who are, who are being affected by that want it changed. So we'll see how that bill moves through the House, but they had a House bill that died that dealt with annexation. So the Senate Bill 330 is the only one moving that deals with that issue.
Has it gone out of the Senate yet to the House, you said?
It has.
Okay, so now the House has got it. Are they going to change it?
They may amend it. I don't know. I mean, I've not talked to the chairman of the committee or the House sponsor of the bill to see if they expect to try to change it. But being that they couldn't pass any version of any bill the first half, means they might want to take a shot at moving our Senate bill.
Yeah.
So
be the one way to get it through. And your survey kind of matches what other senator surveys.
Yep. Senator Toms, he's from. He lives in the Posey County, St. Wendell area. He did a survey, and I think 4 of his questions were the same as my 4. He had some other different ones, but on the 4 that he had dealing with Sunday sales, fuel taxes, casinos, and annexation, his numbers were within about 1% of mine. So if you figure from Du Bois County, Spencer County, Pike County, Gibson, Knox, Warwick, Vandenberg, and Posey, those numbers came out almost identically through that whole region. It means that the people in Southwest Indiana have a lot in common.
Yeah, we all think alike.
We do.
And now, there is a bill that has come through your committee on grain
indemnity.
Yes.
There's a fund paid for by farmers, 0.2% of their grain sales, and they haven't collected on that in about 10 years, but they pay into that themselves. 0.2% of their, whether it's soybeans, corn, wheat, you name it, and there's a fund maintained by the state called the Grain Indemnity Fund. And if a grain elevator, if a farmer would take $10 or $20 or $100,000 worth of grain to a grain purchaser, whether it be a methanol plant like GPC or the co-op in Huntingburg, or places where they would sell their crops at the end of the season. Typically, they'll deliver them. They get them weighed. They get them, tested for moisture, and they'll as they're bringing crops out of the field. Usually, they're taking several loads a day or a week. If one of those facilities would go bankrupt, it could put one large grain elevator. If they went bankrupt, the fund currently had $15 million in it, and it would have been potential with some of the really large, grain buyers out there, that they could have wiped out that fund with a bankruptcy of one grain elevator. And what that fund does is, if a farmer takes their crops to a purchaser like that and they go bankrupt before they get paid, that fund pays the farmer, for their potential losses. So it's an insurance fund paid for by farmers, to help back farmers if in the event of a bankruptcy of a grain dealer. And we're going to raise that fund from $15 million to $25 million. They figure with that 0.2% increase, it'll take about between a year or 2 to get that built up to the $25 million level.
So the bill is just getting that dollar amount higher. The fund already exists and it's already being paid. It's just to get it higher. Okay.
Yep, and it passed unanimously out of the House, passed unanimously out of the Senate committee on Monday. It was up for amending on Thursday, no amendments, so it'll be up for final passage this following Monday, and I expect it to be unanimous as well. So just a good protection for the farm industry.
Are we looking at redistricting again?
There won't be until 2021 will be the actual but there is a study committee being established to look at how we do redistricting. Should we come up with a nonpartisan group outside of the legislative body to approve those to draw those districts, or keep doing it like we've been doing it? And so that House Bill 1003 is a study committee to look at the pros and the cons of how we do redistricting, to come back with some recommendations. As we get closer, it won't be long.
No,
it'll be here fast. So amazing how quick that goes. And House Bill 1002 was an ethics reform bill, just to deal with more transparent financial disclosure by legislators of where they might have potential conflicts of interest, and then any state employee, to look for any opportunity where a state employee might have a conflict, of interest with with people that are doing contracting with or business business associations with. So never hurts to be more transparent and make sure folks aren't benefiting financially, personally from their involvement in government.
And we don't have a whole lot of time left, but the budget, how's that coming along? What are some of the big things?
As it passed out of the House, it's going to have a $470 million increase through K through 12 education, and another $400 million going to roads and transportation projects. Two key components that I support those amounts totally in what we've done so far. We'll continue to tweak the complexity index as it left the House. They were going to make some changes to how the free and reduced lunch percentages of kids in your school, how that impacts your funding mechanism, and it was a pretty abrupt change. Rather than doing before, if you had 100% free and reduced lunch, you got 50% more money, okay. And they were going to look at lowering that that increase from 50% down to 25 or 30%, but that is going to hit some of the, and it's primarily urban, but not necessarily. I had South Spencer schools that they had a large percentage of their students on free reduced lunch, and that was the only school in my Senate district that wasn't going to have a pretty significant increase in funding through the new increased baseline and complexity index changes that they had. They were the one school that had a high percentage of low-income families, and we're going to be negatively impacted, where they would be basically flatlined the next 2 years under the current. But talked to Senator Kenley about that already, and he and other folks that had high low-income concentrations. He's going to look at staging that reduction in over maybe over a couple-year period to help soften the impact to where everybody gets some good positive changes to the to the extra money that we're going to, and the extra per student money that we're putting in, make sure everybody has some benefit from it.
Well, thanks very much to State Senator Mark Messmer, who pays a weekly visit to us, and we hope that you learned a lot. Thank you for watching WJTS Inform. We're local people watching local people.